So, good evening, everybody, and welcome to our meeting of the Oral History Workshop, which we are conducting jointly with our colleagues and partners, the Israeli Oral History Association and the Oral History Archive of the Hebrew University. Welcome to Margalit Bejarano. Ronnie Mikel Arieli can't be with us today, unfortunately. And many thanks go to Sharon Livney, my colleague here at the Leo Baeck Institute, who is taking care of the content, the organization, everything around that. My name is Irene Aue Ben-David, and I'm the director of the Leo Baeck Institute in Jerusalem. And today we have with us Anita Haviv, and she will present her research, her interview project that she conducted from 2019 until 22. Interviews with different people on anti-Semitism, people that are somehow connected to Europe and look at it from outside, but Anita will go into it in detail in a bit. Anita herself is an educational consultant and author. She grew up in Vienna and is a daughter of Holocaust survivors. After immigrating to Israel in 1979, she studied English and French literature at Tel Aviv University. She's also a trained facilitator and mediator and worked as an educator in various Israeli museums and Holocaust memorials. She's also a freelance consultant, developing educational programs dealing with anti-Semitism, the intergenerational impact of the Holocaust, Jewish and Israeli identity, and Israeli-European relations. These topics are also the focus of the two books and numerous articles published previously in German. So the interviews that Anita will present us today and the whole project, there were actually three books that came out of it. The first set of interviews was published in 2019 in German. The English book came out in 21, and then in 22, another German edition with more interviews that she conducted. And so I guess we will hear soon more from Anita about these different layers, because the topic of anti-Semitism and Israel-related anti-Semitism, anti-Zionism is keeping us busy, the whole discussion already for many, many years. And now I think especially after October 7, all of this got a different shift. And I'm happy to have Anita with us here. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much. And thank you very much for the invitation and for all the work in preparing this. Sharon, Irene, and also Ran, who helped with the press work.
Anita, one more word. I'm sorry, I forgot what was on me. Anita would like us to read out some quotes from these interviews, and I would be very glad if there are 1 to 2 volunteers who with me would read these. Anybody wants? If not, I do it on my own. You can also decide later. Anita will give us a sign. Okay.
Thank you very much again. And I would like to start basically to follow up on what Irene started in her introduction. Anti-Semitism has been a constant factor of European history. That's nothing new, I'm telling you. But we don't only deal with this historical phenomenon, but with something which is a phenomenon which is affecting and poisoning European societies today too. And we see that very strongly after October 7th. None of the anti-Semitic reactions to the massacre are new. We know, we know everything, but they are certainly more frightening, more brutal, and also more physical, and they get closer to home, because I know from firsthand, but also from many people, friends who live in Europe, how much friendships break today because of those differing views, or because people just don't understand, or kind of say, okay, so October 7th happened, but now it's enough. And the book, as Irene said, Nothing New in Europe, question mark, and the question mark is very important to me. Israelis look at anti-Semitism today. Basically, I work in civic education, and it aims as an educational tool to contribute to the fight against new and old manifestations of anti-Semitism. And I would like to do that by encouraging individual and also collective self-reflection. And therefore, the heart of the book I'm relating to the newest edition in German, which are 25 interviews. Those are biographical, structured interviews, and I will explain that later, with Jewish Israelis reflecting on their experiences in Germany, Austria, Hungary, Poland, France, and Great Britain. Now, Irene asked me to relate to the fact, since all of you are into oral history, to how I choose the respondents. So I would like to give a short explanation about that. I first of all made a list for myself. Which countries would I like to relate to? Because when I have 15 or 25 interviews, obviously I cannot cover all European countries, and I have to decide if I want to focus more strongly on certain countries, such as Germany, for instance, which I did. So that was one criteria. Then age. I interviewed, the respondents were from 20-something to 80-something. Gender. And I was also very interested to know if the people were religious, secular, right or left or both in terms of Israeli politics. And then only I started to look for interviewees. So I had a very clear picture of what I wanted, whom I wanted to interview, and then I had to fill in those kind of definitions with concrete people. And I found them through professional network and through personal network, but sometimes also I hear somebody in the media and then I just contact the person, and I find that people usually are very willing to get interviewed. I was really surprised how much, I must say. And since then, I have sworn myself that whenever somebody will ask me to give an interview, I will do so, because I think it's very important. And I choose this format of biographical interviews because I very much, like you, believe in the strength of personal stories from an educational point of view. These interviews, even if you look only at the 25 titles, they present individual, sometimes also controversial perceptions and interpretations of anti-Semitism. But what's also very important to me, they also provide insights into Jewish-Israeli family stories, everyday life in Israel and Judaism from different perspectives. And closely related to that, we get insights into identity issues and experiences of exclusion or inclusion. And one question which has become very, very relevant after October 7th was, how do you see Israel? Is it a safe haven in your opinion? And basically my intention, because I was mostly addressing audiences abroad, was to arouse curiosity about the topics of Judaism, Israel, Shoah, and anti-Semitism in different European coverage, and also to encourage in-depth learning about these issues. And that's why this is, by the way, my fourth interview project, and I'm working on my fifth. I always include texts by experts who relate to the subject from a scientific perspective. In this case, it was Professor Moshe Zimmerman, Gisela Dax, who spoke about the role of media in the context of anti-Semitism, and Samuel Salzborn, who in Germany, he is also a historian, but he's also in charge in Berlin for fighting anti-Semitism. So I wanted also some kind of a combination of theory with practical attitudes, how to combat anti-Semitism. And why do I combine the interviews with these scholarly articles? Because when a teacher at school or even somebody at university wants to work with, or in a youth movement wants to work with those interviews, I want this person to have everything in the book she needs in order to be able to deal with the issue. And if she or he wants to read more, that's great. But I want to provide them with everything they need so they feel safe enough to work with that. Now, I would like to ask Irene, and I would be very happy if a few of you would join in, to read 4 excerpts of interviews so that you get a first taste of what I'm talking about.
So I'm starting off, and if someone wants to join in, again, we are very happy. The first quote is from Sonia. She was born in 1976 in Moscow in Russia and is in Israel since 2007. She's a tour operator at a travel agency. And she says on the topic, "Through my work at the Jewish Museum in Berlin, I have learned that many people think in a stereotypical way about Jews. Many visitors told me, but you are all rich. In my mind, it is also absurd when diaspora Jews are collectively blamed for Israeli politics. It is absurd when people who may never have been in Israel are seen as representatives of the Israeli government. These are examples of anti-Semitic expressions I have had in Germany. As a matter of fact, I was more often confronted with a fear of the other. By that, I mean an anxiety the Germans tend to have toward anyone or anything foreign. This relates not only to Jews, but to all strangers. It is hard to explain. As long as I lived among students, some of whom were foreigners, I did not feel it so much. But later, I realized that it is very difficult to belong to German society with a foreign accent and a Russian name. A German passport does not necessarily go hand in hand with acceptance."
Thank you.
Someone else wants?
I'll do one. I've not got my camera on, but I'm on my phone, so I'll try.
Yeah. Okay, great.
It's Lydia, born 1946 in Birmingham, Great Britain. Grew up in Wales, but's lived in Israel since 1966. An informal educator and freelance journalist. The British people held Israel in high esteem until 1967, when Israel conquered the West Bank, the Gaza Strip, and the Golan Heights as a result of the Six-Day War. However, as the years passed and Israel did not retreat from some of these territories, and people started to change their view of Israel, this time I was not seen negatively because I was a Jew, but because I was an Israeli. Today in England, the boycott, divestment, sanctions, BDS movement is a much politicised anti-Israel movement. It is laced with a good proportion of anti-Semitism. Its activists do not fight against the occupation of Palestinian territories, but at its core, they fight against the very existence of Israel. In London and Cardiff, I've witnessed several BDS demonstrations. They give legitimacy to anti-Semitic people to stand in a crowd and yell abuse at Israel. I tried to speak to some of the protesters, they did not talk to me because I am an Israeli. I could as well have shown a red rag to a bull. In comparison to the past, additional factors have been thrown into the arena with regard to the dissemination of anti-Semitism. It is being pumped through a mobile phone. People go for black and white and do not deal with the huge grey areas in between.
Thank you. Mm-hmm. Someone's ready for offer? Okay, so I do that. Ofer Mogadam. He was born in 1969 in Frankfurt, and he grew up in Pforzheim in Germany. He lives in Israel since 2007 in Mevaseret Zion. He's also a tour guide. And he says, Israel gives me much security with regard to anti-Semitism. Of course, many people would say Israel's behavior contributes to anti-Semitism in the world. For me, such a sentence is wrong. There will always be people who do not like Israel. There will always be people who do not like Jews. For me, this hatred of Israel is illogical criticism of the Jewish state, is simply anti-Semitism in disguise, which comes strongly from the political left. And unfortunately, it often comes from people who previously have been targets of group-related enmity. Anti-Semitic slogans can also come from other minorities or the LGBTQ community.
Yeah.
And who goes for the last one?
Seems that it's you.
Okay. So Arthur Karpeles, born in 1954 and in Romania. He grew up in Romania and Israel and lived in Israel between 1961 and 1984. He currently lives in Vienna and is a fashion salesman. At the beginning of my time in Austria, I saw that any person wearing a costume might have been a National Socialist at the time, because that's what you see in movies. But then I realized that actually there is no automatic correlation. Anti-Semites can wear costumes or suits, and Austrians in traditional costumes do not necessarily have to be hostile towards Jews. With the years, I have overcome some stereotypical perceptions, and today I have gained a more differentiated view of anti-Semitism in Austria.
Thank you very much. I will move on now from here. The starting point of nothing new in Europe is that anti-Semitism basically is not a problem of the Jews, but of the anti-Semites and the society that allow it to thrive. But at the same time, as the daughter of Holocaust survivors, I know what it means to be affected by anti-Semitism. And therefore, the subject has been with me since childhood. I was born in Vienna, as Irene said, and the subject was omnipresent at home. The Shoah was a rare topic in our family, but my father spoke a lot about anti-Semitism. He considered most Austrians of his generations to be Nazis and anti-Semites. Therefore, I never could understand why he did not react and even asked me to keep silent when we were confronted with negative remarks about Jews. And in Austria, you know, you don't have to be hit, but there is a lot of this latent, everyday anti-Semitism, even in the most basic language. And when I criticized my father for his silence, he said to me, "There is no point in trying to dissuade anti-Semites from their hatred. Why should I bother? The price I paid is already high enough. My whole family was murdered, and I went through the hell of Auschwitz and Mauthausen." My mother, she asked me, she had a shop, and she asked me to hide my necklace with the Magen David when I came to her shop. And at the time, I reacted very defiantly to my parents' behavior. Today, I understand much better that they wanted to protect me. And what I'm saying now was very true until October 7th. I can say it with much less certitude today, but still, since I live in Israel, I kind of can deal with the subject in a more relaxed way than in the 70s. Israel has created many, many problems for me. I mean, I consider myself part of the political left. And there are many, I don't have to tell you here what problems we have. We have many besides the war. But it has given me some freedom from the constant confrontation with anti-Semitism on a personal level. Again, I'm saying this is true until more or less true, also not absolutely true, but until October 7th. And professionally, I have been dealing with the issue for many years, whether in workshops, educational programs, and in the book. And when working with the subject, I'm asking myself even following question: When does a statement or a situation become anti-Semitic? Is it just my interpretation, or was it also the intention of the other person? How should I respond? Even to statements that sometimes are based on ignorance or not necessarily on anti-Semitism. Does anti-Semitism have unique characteristics, or does it automatically go hand in hand with other forms of hatred against other groups, such as homophobia or anti-Ziganism? And this question is very important to me, because on an educational level, I think that this is the question where we can kind of tie in with other groups who have also experiences of exclusion, and to give them the feeling, I understand you, and whatever you read, you can perhaps also translate into your own frame of reference. And when I realized that my approach to the topic of anti-Semitism and my reaction to it are so strongly influenced by my own biography, I just wanted to know how other Israelis feel about it, and to what extent their stories influence their interpretations of the phenomenon. And this is how the book came about. And I did not know when I started how explosive the subject would become. I mean, every time there's something new, and October 7th is a culmination, but it's not a single event. 6 interviews, I'm relating now to the English book. 6 interviews deal with Germany, 3 with Austria, 1 with Hungary, 2 with Poland, and 2 with France, and 1 with Great Britain. In the new German edition, I added more countries. I had a very interesting interview with an Israeli, Sylvia Babluch, who lives in Italy and who comes from Libya, and who experienced anti-Semitism in Libya already. And then she came to Israel. And then since then she has been living in Italy, and she experiences anti-Semitism today, but also because many times people think that she's an Arab. So you've got all these kind of pictures which shatter stereotypes, and that's exactly what I want to do. As I said, 3 generations were interviewed. The oldest was 80 at the time, and the youngest 27. As I said, some define themselves as religious, others as secular. One person that was also a very interesting story, she's from Hungary. She did not know that she was Jewish until she was a young adult. That was the big secret in the family, because in the communist era, they were just afraid to deal with their Jewish identity. Among the interviewees are Israelis who immigrated from Europe, live in Europe, or have a connection to Europe. So some of them were born in different countries. Some of them came to Europe. One of them was the Israeli ambassador in France, Danishek. Others fell in love with somebody. Others just were fed up with Israel. So there are many reasons for people coming to Israel or going to Europe, but having deep connections to at least 2 countries, and some of the interviewees relate to more than 2 countries. I would like to talk about the method I used. And again, this is my 4th interview project, and I use the same method, and I also use it in my new project now, because I think it works very well for me. And also having worked with it in educational frameworks, I think it worked for me. All the interviews begin with an open part where I let just people tell me their story, their grandparents' story, and so on, which is the classical oral history thing, and also their own biography. So people can see, the readers can see where those respondents come from, in, you know, family-wise, culturally, in their relationship to religion, what kind of experiences did they have at school, and so on. And in the second part, I worked with the leitmotif anti-Semitism. So the questions were, what were your experiences with anti-Semitism? Give us one concrete example, and then explain us, why do you think this is anti-Semitic? What made this specific incident anti-Semitic for you? Because I want the reader to understand. I always have the reader in mind. Then, what is your attitude to Israeli politics? How do you relate to criticism of Israel and anti-Semitism? You know, this famous discussion, where is criticism really legitimate and where does it become anti-Semitic? As I said already, the link between anti-Semitism and other forms of racism, and this is very important to me. Their assessment of combating anti-Semitism in Europe, and if they think Israel should play a role in this context. And at the end of the day, I interviewed 25 people and I got 25 different answers. The conversations express the perceptions and interpretations of the respondents and not objective facts. They mirror the wide range of the Israeli discourse on anti-Semitism. And the spectrum ranges from anti-Semitism is an incurable disease unrelated to other forms of racism, to the statement, people who exclude minorities do not focus on one group. An anti-Semitic person is most likely to reject refugees and LGBT people as well. There might be exception, I'm quoting, but from my experience, that's the way exclusion mechanism works. Now, if you put these two statements next to another, they are kind of contradicting each other, and there's a lot of things you can discuss even just using these two statements. The Israeli-French historian, and I'm very grateful to two experts who accepted to be interviewers and shared also their personal history with me. So the French historian Stéphanie Courroux-Blechard emphasizes, you have to clearly differentiate between anti-Semitism and racism, but fight both. The principle of many voices also applies to the perception of Israel's role as a safe haven for Jews. After the Shoah, I find it, I quote, after the Shoah, I find it unimaginable that Jews live in the diaspora and the state of Israel does not exist. Other respondents say that Israel does not strengthen their sense of security. That was before October 7th. Several interviewees are worried about the future of Israel. I'll just turn on the light because I think it's getting very dark. Sorry. The perceptions of Israel's role in the context of contemporary anti-Semitism are particularly divergent. All respondents agreed that there are forms of criticism of Israel which are anti-Semitic. The writer, Edgar Keret, who also agreed to be interviewed, put this rare consensus as follows. And that's, for me, that's also a very important quote. When it comes to Israel and the conflict with the Palestinians, many people in Europe feel compelled to divide the Israeli Palestinian conflict between good guys and bad guys. Most of the time, there is no room for gray areas. When Israel is concerned, opinions are not based on facts, but on feelings and one's own past. And that's also an idea which is very important to me, that basically ask yourself, why do you react in this way? Several of the respondents do not mind their words in criticizing Israeli politics, in spite of the fact that they have been confronted with anti-Semitism in Europe. And I must say that some of the interviewees called me now these last weeks and told me that had they known then, when they gave the interview, what would happen after October 7th, they would change their answers because they were confronted with situations they would not have believed. So, you know, you make an interview and 1 month later, the same person would have said something different. So, but that's always true with interviews. I must say that when I was in Vienna last December, I also had this kind of experiences. You know, I was confronted several times with the saying, yeah, Israel is acting according to eye to an eye principle. Now, I'm the last person who says that everything the Israeli army does is perfect or okay, but completely ignoring that the country also needs deterrence, and also what happened, and kind of saying, okay, so what? So there was a massacre, but now it's enough. That was very weird to me. And what is also interesting, coming back to the book, is that we can see how different people relate to different situations. For instance, to similar situations. For instance, there was one young woman, she was very young when she went to Germany to study Schnapsbrennen, how to make alcohol. And since then she has built a business of kosher schnapps. And when she was invited then, she was perhaps in her 20s, to a school in a small village in Bavaria. The children who had never seen a living Jew before, you know, stared at her and wondered about her blue eyes. And she said that felt terrible for her. She felt like an animal in the zoo. On the other hand, another woman who also, she went to schools, and she loved the fact that they were kind of looking at her and being puzzled that she's a Jew. And she thought this was a wonderful opportunity to dispel prejudices. Now, I'm not judging this behavior or that behavior. I'm just saying that why did one person react like this and the other like that? And the younger woman, she is religious. She was very young at the time. So she had a different reaction than a more mature 40-year-old woman who felt much safer in her own identity at that stage in life. The principle of polyphony also applies to perceptions of Israel's role as a safe haven. The majority of respondents saw Israel as a safe haven. Now, again, I would have to ask all the 25 people what they think today. As one respondent put it, Israel is my home. If you can't walk around in your pajamas at home, where else can you? And what she meant, because she's religious, that, you know, nobody is asking her, why do you wear a skirt, and why do you eat kosher, and why do you do this, and why do you do that? So she feels here like in her pajamas. So to sum it up, the main message of the book lies in its pluralism. And that requires from the reader the ability to listen, to endure irritation, to remain empathetic without losing sight of inconsistencies. The respondents are not historians. They might even say things which are wrong, but that's how they see it and that's how they feel about it. And I would like to encourage the readers to ask themselves the following questions. Do I criticize Jews in the diaspora and or in Israel for what they do or for what they are? I think that's a very important question. Do I judge Jews as they are portrayed from the outside, or do I try to understand them from their self-perceptions? Are my opinions based on knowledge, or am I guided by prejudice? Are my attitudes critical or hostile? It is my deep conviction that the first step in combating anti-Semitism, or any form of racism for that matter, is to get people to question the mechanism of their own judgment. Self-reflection opens a door that broadens horizons and deepens the capacity for dialogue. I want to use the personalized story to encourage curiosity about others and the ability to empathize. And let's be very honest, since we all tend to instinctively perceive the foreign and unknown as threatening, the biographical approach seems to me to be a helpful method. The conversations are intended to provide readers with an impetus to reflect on the question of whether personal socialization experiences influence the interpretation of anti-Semitism. This applies first to the discussion of the interviews, but in a second step, readers could ask themselves the same question in relation to their own biographies. And I just elaborated on the question. My point is to encourage people to think about the accuracy of their own judgment. And this doesn't necessarily mean, because it's not my intention, to change their opinions, but always putting them to test. And I must confess, I try not to ask other people to do things which I didn't experience myself. So reading or interviewing these people and hearing people say things which as an Israeli and as a Jew, I don't agree at all, has been a challenge for me in the first place, and not an easy one. And I must say, it was very difficult for me not to get into an argument, but just listen and try to understand. And it's a very good exercise, as I must say. And I must honestly say that since I interviewed many Israelis who are critical of the country and the politics of the country, I was kind of worried, am I delivering ammunition to the wrong audience? And I have no unequivocal answer to that questions. But I do think, even after October 7th, that anti-Semitism cannot be fought by fear of criticism. I believe that criticism must be faced, but that's a very personal issue. I would like to stop here and ask Irene to read out the other 4 interview excerpts, and then we can go into the discussion. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Anita. So the next quote is of Tirza Lemberger, born in 1938 in Jerusalem. She grew up in Jerusalem and she lives in Austria since 1960 in Vienna. She's a lecturer in Jewish studies. On the question, do you consider criticism of Israel as anti-Semitic? She answered, for me, that is the case when people automatically adopt the Palestinian point of view without questioning. Europeans are naive and adopt the Arabic narrative without checking it for accuracy and without taking the Israeli version into consideration. This leads to a criticism of Israel based on imprecise or incomplete facts at best. For me, this is a bias based on anti-Semitism. Israel's policy, in my opinion, is too focused on what will the others say, and that can sometimes harm the country's interests. Ultimately, this excessive consideration of public opinion abroad does not pay because Israel is scolded regardless of its actions. Who wants to be Edgar Keret?
I'll do another one if no one wants to.
Thanks.
Okay, Edgar Keret, born 1967 in Ramat Gan, Israel, grew up in Ramat Gan, Israel, lives in Tel Aviv as a writer and filmmaker. So I think our current government is the least liberal of all the governments we've had so far. It takes a racist stand against Israeli Arabs and keeps the Palestinians in occupied territories without democratic rights and without the freedom of movement. On the one hand, there is no doubt in my mind that anti-Semites benefit from the ugly political reality of Israel today. They use the wrongdoings of the Israeli government to direct moral accusations against all Jews. On the other hand, the Israeli government automatically declares any objection to its agenda as anti-Semitism. I disagree when Israel reacts to German criticism by saying, we do not want the Germans to preach to us after the Holocaust. Israel must take responsibility for the occupation and the discrimination against its Arab citizens. My parents taught me never to use the Shoah as an argument to avoid criticism.
Thank you. Miri Freilich, born in 1954 in Lodz in Poland. She grew up in Jerusalem and lives in Israel since 1957 in Netanya. She's a historian. However, the official narrative in Poland is in denial of the country's historical anti-Semitism and the crimes committed against Jews by the Polish long before the Holocaust. There were many cases of collaboration in which the local population betrayed and also killed their Jewish neighbors. I'm convinced that this country cannot come to terms with its past as long as it does not acknowledge its guilt. I criticize Poland, I criticize America, and I criticize Austria or Germany or any other country. Therefore, I consider it legitimate to criticize my country as well. I do not see anything wrong with criticizing. However, it depends on its wording and its intention. I have no tolerance whatsoever for a condemnation that explicitly or implicitly denies Israel's right to exist. Caroline, would you also take the last one?
Yes. Okay. Stephanie Korobel-Sher, born 1971 in Paris, grew up in Paris and has lived in Israel since 2008 in the south of Israel, a researcher and a historian. Israel gives me a sense of security. The kidnapping of Ilham Halami in Paris, which I mentioned before, sent shockwaves through the Jewish community in France. As a consequence, many Jews decided to go to Israel because they did not feel secure anymore. I had the same reaction. At the time, we had 2 children. I was afraid that they may be hurt because I was raising them as Jews. Because I'm an expert on Holocaust denial, my research focuses on people filled with hatred. That could endanger me personally, and therefore I have to protect myself. In Israel, I feel less threatened. Perhaps I'm not cautious enough, but I have to find a middle between my work and my personal security.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thanks, Anita, for your presentation. And are there questions or comments? We still have some time, some 50, 20 minutes for your feedback.
So yeah, I'll go further. Can I just ask the youngest person? I know you said ages, but were there any teenagers or was it all adults? your research?
The youngest was 27.
Right, sorry, yeah. Would you look at researching with teenagers? I'm just thinking in the UK and I know the countries, there's so much anti-Semitism at universities at the moment as well. And students are posting a lot about how unsafe they feel. So is that a future area you might look at?
Yeah, they've obviously, as I said, I mean, the problem with the subject is that it's never ending and that it's changing with every event that is happening. You have to start anew. I mean, on one hand, there's nothing new, and on the other hand, there is much new. So, yes, I'm working currently on a different project, which is also dealing with interviews. And it's kind of a different subject, but it's still connected to my fight against anti-Semitism. I make an interview project about how Israeli civil society reacted to the massacre of October 7, because it's just unbelievable what has been done. Whatever has not been done by the government and the army and whoever was in charge, civil society has done. And basically, this is also part of my efforts to show faces of Israel which people are not so aware of. And here and there in this book, I definitely include many more young people.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Tony, please.
I was sorry. Yeah. Is it me?
Yeah, okay, go ahead.
Oh, no, I'm sorry. I didn't.
No, it's fine. Go ahead. We have enough time.
Okay. Because I was late, so I wanted to ask what the title of the book was.
What the what?
The title of the book.
Nothing New in Europe.
Okay.
In English, Israelis Look at Europe Today. It was published by Berkan, and I see that Marion Berkan is here, and I'm very glad to have her with us. So,
and I have a question about what you said. I have several. First of all, you said that you said several times that you think that anti-Semitism is always racist, like that racism is intrinsic. And I've always thought that there are several different types of anti-Semitism, and that racist anti-Semitism is one of them. So why did you come to the conclusion that racism is intrinsic?
No, what I was saying is that first of all, one form of anti-Semitism is definitely racism against Jews. But what I said, or the question I asked, whether people who are anti-Semitic are also racist against other minorities,
okay.
or hate other minorities. In German, you say gruppenbezogene Menschenfeindlichkeit. So it's enmity against group-related enmity. That's the right term.
And then I also wanted to ask you, because you talked about like everyday anti-Semitism in Austria, and my personal experience is that it's never changed. It's remained as vicious as it's always been. So
in Austria or
in Austria, and but you I wanted to ask you what you thought about the new Jewish community in Vienna, because everybody tells me they're all so excited and it's a huge community and everything, you know what I mean, like new life. Do you sense that this everyday anti-Semitism has gone away, so that there's really one can have a sense of security now in Vienna, or is your feeling like mine that it's basically remained the same? I don't know. You know what I mean?
Yes, I think there is this everyday kind of racism which I experienced, which was mostly about language. And, you know, I was never personally attacked because I'm also not necessarily recognizable as a Jew. Now, the Jewish community in Vienna is not big. I think it has 12,000 members, but I know it is extremely well organized. And it's always helping. It was helping Jews who had to flee from the Ukraine. And, you know, it's always there to help. And it's got a lot, it has an institution helping Holocaust survivors. And it's really well organized in comparison to other Jewish communities. So that's why I think it is kind of, you know, an example. I don't think that I think that anti-Semitism is kind of part of the cultural DNA of Europe. It's there in the language, it's part of the code and so on. And again, we have to differentiate when it comes to Israel, it's a whole different story, but also related to old forms of anti-Semitism.
Mm-hmm. But so you think that there is space for enthusiasm, because again, everybody's so enthusiastic about the Viennese Jewish
I'm not
life.
enthusiastic about it, but I think it does. You know, my mother lived in Vienna until 2018, until her death, and I can say that the Jewish community helped me a lot, and that's something to be appreciated by members of the community. So I'm not sure if I'm enthusiastic, but to a certain point, I'm glad I am.
Okay, sounds good. Okay, thank you.
So the next is Tony Cummings from Paris.
Hi, actually Tony Cummings from New York City, and I now live in Paris. So I'm approaching this as an American Jew, a New York Jew, who moved to Paris several years ago. That has absolutely nothing to do with politics. But I think, as my grandmother used to say, non-Jews get their anti-Semitism in their mother's milk. And I don't think there's any such thing as new anti-Semitism. It's the same old anti-Semitism, or as I prefer to call it, anti-Judaism, that growing up in the 50s and the 60s and the 70s, we, certainly in America, lived in kind of a bubble. We were privileged. There weren't really any enemies. And in New York, we had the freedom. I mean, everybody was Jewish, even if they weren't Jewish. So what's happening now is just going back to business as usual, because prior to the Shoah, this was what it was like to be a Jew. That, you know, some people hated you, some people discriminated you, and some people tolerated you. But since October 7th, I find myself becoming far less tolerant of this non-Jewish mishigas. I think that there's no such thing as a Palestinian. If they really would have wanted peace, they would have had it 75 years ago. They don't want it. And I just kind of don't understand why so many people have blinders on about this whole situation. They hate us. End of story. We're not going anywhere, but they hate us.
First of all, I would like to say that anti-Semitism has a way of adapting itself to new subjects. You know, it did so with Corona, which we already have forgotten as if it was 100 years ago. And it has adapted itself to the existence of Israel and the current situation. Having said that, on a personal note, I don't agree to say it's as simple as that they hate us and that's it. I think as Israelis, we also must look at what we made wrong, and we certainly did much wrong. But I also have I'm much less tolerant after October 7th about when people, you know, confront me with situations in which they completely ignore what has happened to us in Israel and the fact that we underwent a very serious trauma as a society, and we haven't recovered. We are still in October 7th. We are into October 137. I don't know how many days. Yeah? And the whole issue of hostages and the rape and all this stuff, it's so emotionally affecting us. So it's very difficult. I fully feel with you, because I find it also more difficult to get into discussions. But as an educator, I think I have to, and I also have to admit when there is something wrong. I mean, I have spent the last year in Israel being on the streets against this right-wing government, which I'm completely against, not only because of the Palestinians, but mainly because of us Israelis.
Yeah, I agree with you, and you know, I'm no friend of the American version of Netanyahu, but I think that as far as the Palestinians go, it's not our problem. It's the Arabs' problem. They're the ones who didn't want to integrate the people who lived in what was Transjordan into their own societies. And they left it that way specifically as a way to bludgeon Israel. And you know what? It's working. What I don't get is why a whole country of smart Jews screwed up the publicity.
I think it's more than screwing up the publicity, but this takes us to a different discussion. So
there are also some more questions. Yael Danieli, she also wrote something in the chat, but would you like to ask directly?
Yes, I'm going to ask the same question I wrote in the chat.
Okay.
Hi.
Sorry, I didn't look at the chat. Apologies.
It's okay. So thank you. We ordered the book to our library. We are the International Center for Multi-Generational Legacies of Trauma. So you can see the relevance. And maybe you know my own writings. And I was the first one who pointed to heterogeneity among Holocaust survivors to the Holocaust. So I'm actually very what should I call it? Very excited about your finding of heterogeneity and divergence. But I have a question. In the interviews, it specifies where the person is. Did you check for Holocaust background?
Did I check what?
Specifically for Holocaust background.
Yes. Yes. It was part, that's why I put, not all of them have Holocaust background, by the way.
Exactly.
Because I have also people of Persian descent, Ofer Mogadam, but for those who do, and I wanted not to only have people with Holocaust background.
Good.
But, I had this Italian respondent who was in Libya. She had pogroms, but it was not Holocaust related.
Right.
So I did check the Holocaust background, but it was not the focus. But in the family history, I addressed this.
Because I would love for you to perhaps examine Holocaust background versus non-Holocaust background, and to see whether there were any identifiable differences or not. But this is a very important question.
This I can answer you, not scientifically, but from my feeling, definitely people who have a Holocaust background are more sensitive to anti-Semitism, no doubt about it.
That's very important. That's extremely important. Thank you.
But you need to make another research to prove that.
No, yes, exactly. If you can extend it, we can do together because.
With pleasure.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Okay, and then there's a question of Maya Gaia.
Hi, thank you. Yeah. Thank you, Anita, and thank you everyone for this interesting talk. So I'll be brief, or I'll try at least. I'm an MA student for oral history in Columbia University at the moment. I'm an Israeli, and I someone asked me to do an oral history interviews with Israelis in Colombia and talk about their experience about like what's been going on after October 7th. I assume everyone knows Colombia is a high tension place at the moment. So there's a lot to talk about. So I'm very curious in general about, you know, the methods about tackling all these kind of conversations. But to be more specific, and I think you talked about it, but not in a direct way, and perhaps this is something that's a bit different from Europe and what's happening in US campuses, is I think the most common sort of anti-Semitism or questionable anti-Semitism here is people just talking about anti-Zionism. And, you know, and then you're confronted with like, oh, what do you mean when you say anti-Zionism? And trying to figure out whether this is in fact anti-Semitism. So I was just wondering if you have anything to say on that and how this comes through in your interviews. Thank you.
First of all, feel free to contact me if you want to talk.
Yeah, sure. Thank you.
Philip,
How can
obviously, this is a, you know, there's a whole discussion about this, because is anti-Zionism really anti-Semitism? I mean, this is also a very big question we have to ask. Automatically, is it automatically anti-Semitism? And I think this is a question we have to have the courage to ask ourselves. Personally, at the moment when somebody denies Israel's right to exist, to me, this is anti-Semitism, but this is something other people see differently. So if I'm again trying to be open, I want to listen to people. Why do they say, how can they explain it, and so on. So this kind of questions brings us as Israelis and as Jews many times to our own limits. That's what I was saying, that it's very difficult. Sometimes these interviews were very, very difficult. But if we want to get honest answers, we have to let people talk, because otherwise we also cannot. And again, I'm not a historian. I'm an educational. I'm into education, so I'm interested. What dialogue can I get out of this for this person, but also for the readers, and that's what I'm interested in doing.
Before going on to the next question, there are still some in the chat. I just allow myself a question. Anita, you said you prepared this book actually with the idea that it's, you know, people can work with it right away. Did you receive already any feedback on that in different contexts where it was used? So how would people work with it, and what will they take from that?
First of all, I worked with it a lot myself, with students, with pupils. You have to adapt. I gave a few educational suggestions, and I also made a lot of seminars with teachers to teach the teacher, to train the trainer how to work with the interviews. Because you can tell, if you work with young people, you take, for instance, a statement which deals with the experience of inclusion and exclusion, and then you let the young kids work through art, or I let them make statues, you know, human statues. I don't know if you know this method, where the group makes a whole statue expressing certain feelings. Or some of them then went out and made short videos about people from their environment who were affected by anti-Semitism or by you know, other forms of exclusion. So, and again, it depends. If you're working with adults, you can do it in a completely other way than when you do work with young people. But I on purpose, I tried to keep the language easy enough so that you could work with many people. And personally, I have experienced with it, and I also know that people who did work with it found it very helpful.
Okay, thank you. So then it's Tamar. You wrote something, but you also want to speak?
I'll try to overcome technology. Here I am because I'm working with the computer. Do you hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, because I'm working with two things, technology, I'm sorry. As an Israeli born in Israel, when I started traveling, Europe, United States, and all over, I found that I just found out how privileged as a Jewish Israeli I was to grow up without having to think about myself being a Jew. So for me, I would say, and I'm an Israeli, and that would be enough. That would be my identity. And then I would meet people and they would start asking me, are you a Jew also? I said, yeah, I'm a Jew. I'm a Jewish Israeli. And then they would ask something other Israeli non-Jewish people. And then I figure and I found out that the basic problem is ignorance. People don't know nothing, not nothing, but most of them don't have information. Let's start with how big Israel is. We are something, they try and figure out something with boundaries like at least France or Europe or anything. And when, for instance, when I always travel with a map, and we put the map of Israel in the same kind of equivalent one-on-one. And then you see it's not bigger than one of the states in America or whatever it is, and they are shocked, people. So the problem is with finding those questions, and with anti-Semitism is basically ignorance. And then it based also on how much the religion comes into the education when they were young, because people who got educated somehow with the Christian thing, they tend to see Israel with the Jews and all comes with anti-Jesus and things like that. So I would love, I think, and Anita, you are doing a great work with your book, if only to show the diversity, because they tend to put it in one box. When one person said something, we all said it. So if the government did this and that, we are all blamed for this and that because we are Israelis. So thank you, Anita, for your work, and I hope you'll succeed.
Thank you very much. Very kind of you.
Hey, Jackie, it's your turn. You want to say something, or you had some questions, criticism about the title?
No, I'm curious. Good to see you again, Anita.
Hi.
I'm curious. Hello. Yeah, it's been years.
Yes.
Yeah, I'm curious. Again, the question was about the title. You know, if nothing is new in Europe, then why should Israel bother? In other words, that if the anti-Semitism is part of the European DNA, then any criticism, whatever what of Israeli policy, will inevitably be seen as an expression of what's in the DNA. So I wonder a little bit about if you've got any feedback from people on the title. But more than that, I'm interested in to hear if there's the question was already posed. What kinds of questions? I mean, it's a bit early, but what kinds of questions have you received from educators or from classrooms in their using of the book or of the interviews? Yeah.
Okay. Thank you, Jackie. So first of all, the title is with a question mark.
Uh-huh. Okay.
And all my titles, all my books have question marks. And if you read the article, there is a whole page about the issue of the question mark, because that's the whole issue for me, the question mark. I'm not making a statement. I'm asking the question and letting 25 people answer the question from their point of view. So I'm definitely not into saying Nothing new in Europe, exclamation mark. No, that's not what I'm saying. And if you read the interviews, there are people who definitely come from the left side and are extremely critical of Israel. So, and the reader is confronted with that too, but also with right-wing people, because I think that's what Israel is all about. Yeah. The question, first of all, I think, and most of my experience is in Germany and in Austria, is that people really know very little about Israel. They know very little about Judaism or being Jewish, not in terms of do we keep Shabbat, but in terms, what does it mean to be Jewish, or what does it mean to be in a Holocaust family? But also, they were kind of, wow, that helps me a lot in giving me, because all I'm doing is trying to give a picture of the self-perception, because usually Jews and Israelis are seen through the outside, whether positively or negatively, never mind. And in all my work, I try to give a picture of individual self-perceptions. And the feedback was that they found that very interesting to understand, okay, how do we see ourselves and how do we live and how do we act? And why did that hurt me and why didn't that hurt me? And can I relate to it? And they were also asking about, how could I even try to work with that through different methods? I worked with a school in Germany. I got a prize last summer. And I had a wonderful teacher in theater, and we really developed a whole shtick around the interviews with the children. Because, for instance, there are many children who have a Muslim background in Germany, in German school classes. So how do I deal with them? And how do I integrate them? And can these interviews also be a way for them to open up? And it worked because
There's a new book of Ezra Özirek called The Subcontractors of Guilt on Shoah Muslim identity in Germany. Yeah.
Yeah, but also not only in relation to Shoah, but in relation to their own lives. They are also confronted with being excluded. So, I always try to bring it to their frame of reference too. Because there's no point in talking especially not with young people, only about Jews. I want them to be able to tie in the whole issue to their own experience.
Thank you.
Yael, you got the last question. And then we are going to close.
Please, two quick questions. One is, who wrote The Subcontractors of Guilt?
Ezra Özirek, OZ. I'll put it on the.
Yes,
I'll type it out.
Thank you. That sounds very, very similar to how I think. Europe emptied itself of 6 million Jews and took in 6 million Muslims. So, but that's just a side comment. Anita, I want to share a very current incident with you and get your opinion. I was invited to speak at the Nuremberg Academy, except it's a conference, except I discovered that it's taking place on Yom Kippur. So, of course, I said I can't go because, but I also tried to explain to them the meaning of inviting a Jewish person to speak at Nuremberg on Yom Kippur. And there was simply no understanding. They simply said, so can you come the day before? There was totally no comprehension. And these are educated people, right? They are educated. And I even asked my colleague responsible for law at the German mission to the United Nations about it. And he said, well, in Germany, we don't think about it. What is your opinion? And I'm reeling inside, to be honest, because these are colleagues that I've worked with for many years.
I must say I'm very surprised because from my experience, and I organize many conferences abroad in Germany, I work with a German organization, and that's the first thing they ask, when are the Jewish holidays? So I'm really surprised. It's not an experience I have made in Germany.
Yeah, so I can actually, if you put your email on the chat, I will actually forward you the exchange. Very polite exchange of emails. And this is the director of the Nuremberg Academy. You know, it's actually built. It's actually, the meeting takes place at the room of the Nuremberg trials.
I understand, but I'm really surprised.
Yeah, so no, I'm still like totally nuts about
Not
it.
my experience in Germany. I must say I have seen a lot of consideration and but you know, I believe it obviously happened. So
yeah, so
bad news.
Yeah, okay.
Thank you.
Would you please put your email
I
in
did.
the chat?
I did.
You're wonderful. And to the young Israeli researchers at Columbia University, I also am an Israeli American here. If you want to be in touch with me, I will put my email in the website too. Thanks, Anita.
Thank you.
Yeah, so thanks everyone. Thanks, Anita. Thanks for
Thank you, Irene.
thanks to our discussion, for everybody who participated. And I put you on the chat the invitation to our next meeting within a month. That will be in Hebrew. We always do one in English, one in Hebrew.
Oh,
and,
great.
hope to see you again, and take care, everyone. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye. Thank you.